I am not perfect. I never claimed to be. The code of Harry was meant to keep me from becoming like the monsters I hunted, a rigid set of rules designed to give my darkness a purpose. Kill only those who deserve it, murderers, people who've taken innocent lives and slipped through the cracks of justice. That was my guiding principle, my twisted form of control. But control is fragile. Even the most methodical minds can falter. There were times when instinct overpowered reason, when fear outweighed judgment, moments where I crossed the line and took lives that didn't fit my code. Some were accidents, tragic missteps that haunted me. Others were driven by false assumptions, the wrong conclusion drawn from the wrong evidence, and some were for self-preservation. Because when you live with a dark passenger, survival often demands sacrifices. In this video, we'll examine 10 innocent people who died by my hand. Each one a reminder that no matter how carefully I tried to follow my father's code, I was still human, flawed, impulsive, and dangerously capable of losing control. Jonathan Farrow was everything I despised. Arrogant, abusive, and utterly indifferent to the people around him. He was a well-known fashion photographer with a dark reputation. Models and assistants whispered about his violent tendencies, and when women in his circle started disappearing, I knew what I had to do. I watched him closely, monitoring his interactions with his employees. Farrow was rude, condescending, a man who thrived on power and intimidation. Reports of his abuse piled up, and rumors tied him to the missing women. The pattern was clear, undeniable. Farrow fit the profile of a killer, and the code demanded justice. So I set up my kill room, grabbed Farrow, and prepared to do what I do best. He begged. They always do. He admitted to being cruel, violent even, but swore he had never killed anyone. But I trusted my instincts. I knew better. I silenced his pleas and ended his life. But instincts can betray you. Hours later, I discovered the truth. The real killer had been Farrow's assistant. The evidence had been misleading. The conclusion I clung to so tightly had been wrong. I had killed an innocent man, and no matter how much I tried to justify it, no matter how cruel Farrow had been, the death was on me. Roger Hicks was unsettling. He was loud, flamboyant, a man who wore his confidence like armor. He surrounded himself with women, parading them like trophies. To most, he seemed like just another self-obsessed socialite, but to me, he was something else, a threat hiding behind a mask of charm. I started watching him, following him to clubs, observing how he treated the women in his life. His habits felt suspicious. Women seemed to drift in and out of his world too quickly, some vanishing altogether. It didn't add up, and I let my doubts fester. Instinct whispered that Hicks was hiding something dark. I should have waited for proof, but sometimes instincts scream louder than reason. One night, I followed Hicks from a nightclub, waited for the right moment, and took him. My kill room was ready. Plastic-lined, clinical, perfect. Hicks woke up strapped to my table, and I asked the question I always ask. Why? Hicks denied everything. He admitted to being a womanizer, careless, shallow, but never violent. But I'd made up my mind. I convinced myself my instincts were never wrong, so I silenced him. Only later did I uncover the truth, the kind of truth that lingers in the pit of your stomach. Hicks hadn't hurt anyone. None of the women were missing. No accusations, no reports, no trail of victims. Just my own paranoia. And another innocent man who died, because I refused to listen to reason. Dr. Emmett Meridian was a respected psychiatrist, a man with a reputation for guiding people out of their darkest moments. Some of his patients swore he had saved their lives, but others weren't so lucky. A number of his past clients had taken their own lives. Too many, in my opinion. The pattern gnawed at me. Something didn't feel right. The more I dug, the more I wondered if Meridian was really a healer at all. What if those suicides weren't what they seemed? What if Meridian had manipulated his patients, pushed them into ending their own lives just to satisfy some twisted craving for control? The thought lingered, growing louder every day. But that's all it was. A thought. A suspicion without evidence. No witnesses, no proof of foul play. Just my own mind, convincing itself that Meridian deserved to die. I let that suspicion win. I lured him in, took him to my kill room, and strapped him to the table. Face to face, I confronted him, demanded answers. His response was different, not defensive, not angry. just frightened, confused by the accusations. He reminded me that psychiatrists can't force treatment, that not every death is preventable. But I didn't believe him. I trusted my instincts, ignoring the fact that they had led me astray before, and so I ended his life, convinced I had done the right thing. But doubt has a way of creeping in. Even as I cleaned up the mess, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. There was no evidence, no clear proof, just my own paranoia masquerading as certainty, and for that, an innocent man paid the price. Sergeant James Dokes was relentless. He was the only one who could see through me, the only one who wasn't fooled by the mask I wore every day at Miami Metro. While my colleagues saw an awkward, harmless forensic analyst, Dokes sensed something else, something darker, and he never let that feeling go. He followed me, studied my movements, and kept digging. No matter how many distractions I threw in his path, he stayed locked onto me like a bloodhound. He wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he uncovered the truth. I should have found a way to defuse him, but I didn't. Instead, I took the easy way out. I framed him, planted false evidence that linked Dokes to the Bay Harbor butchers' murders. The setup was convincing, too convincing. Miami Metro swallowed the lie whole, and suddenly Dokes was the one in handcuffs. I didn't kill Dokes with my own hands, but I may as well have. His death wasn't an accident. It was inevitable. The web I spun trapped him, left him isolated and helpless. Even when I had a chance to fix things, to admit what I'd done, to clear his name, I didn't. I let an innocent man die so I could keep breathing free air. The code says to kill only those who deserve it. Dokes didn't fit that description, but sometimes survival demands breaking your own rules, and for that, I have to live with the blood on my hands. Maria Laguerta was sharp, too sharp. Her instincts were razor-edged, cutting through deception in a way few others at Miami Metro could. While others missed the details, she didn't. Laguerta trusted her gut, and more often than not, it led her exactly where she needed to be. That made her a brilliant detective, and a dangerous one. When the Bay Harbor butcher case resurfaced, Laguerta refused to accept what everyone else believed, that Dokes was the killer. She knew better. The timeline didn't fit, the evidence had gaps, and the closer she looked, the more convinced she became that Dokes had been framed. Worse still, she began to suspect who had really orchestrated it. Laguerta dug too deep. She retraced the events of November 2006, followed the clues others had ignored, and connected the dots. She saw through the lies, through my lies, and realized the truth. I was the Bay Harbor butcher. When she confronted me, she had everything she needed. Solid evidence that could unravel my carefully constructed life. She told me she wasn't bluffing. She would see me arrested, exposed, and brought to justice, and she would have done it too. I was faced with a choice. Let her live and risk everything, or silence her to protect my secret. My code had always been clear. Only kill those who deserve it. But Laguerta wasn't a killer. She was a good cop, an honest woman who refused to turn her back on the truth. But my code couldn't save me from this choice. Laguerta had to die, and when she did, it wasn't just her blood that stained my hands. It was the death of everything I believed made me different from the monsters I hunted. Zach Hamilton reminded me of someone I knew all too well. A troubled kid, barely holding it together, with instincts he couldn't control. He wasn't a monster yet, not like my usual targets, but I knew what would happen if someone didn't step in. I saw myself in him, and I couldn't let him become what I had. Instead of seeing Zach as a threat, I saw an opportunity, a chance to shape him, the way Harry had shaped me. I believed I could teach him the code, give him a purpose that kept his urges in check. I convinced myself that if Zach could be taught to direct his darkness, he wouldn't have to destroy his life the way I nearly destroyed mine. For a while, it worked. Zach listened, learned, and followed my lead. He trusted me. I trusted him. But trust is dangerous. Before Zach could fully embrace the code, something snapped. Not in him, but in me. One moment of weakness, one impulsive lapse of control, and I killed him. Not as part of a plan, not to stop a killer. Just a mistake. A thoughtless, selfish act driven by emotion. Something I had always believed I was above. The truth was painful. Zach wasn't beyond saving. He wasn't a killer yet. He was still learning. Still trying to find his place in a world that didn't understand him. Killing Zach wasn't justice. It wasn't even self-preservation. It was a failure. My failure. I destroyed what he could have been. I stole his chance to master the darkness the way I had. And in doing so, I proved that sometimes my greatest threat wasn't out there. It was inside me. Ethan Turner was uncertain. The police suspected him of murder, but suspicion alone wasn't enough to build a case. There wasn't much evidence, just whispers and speculation. Nothing concrete, nothing certain. But I've never needed certainty, just instinct. And mine told me that Ethan was guilty. I convinced myself that he was a predator, a threat disguised as an ordinary man. And if the law couldn't stop him, I would. I did what I always do. I took him. My kill room was prepared, clean, controlled, familiar. I confronted him, hoping for a confession or some subtle sign of guilt. Anything to reassure me that I was doing the right thing, but Ethan gave me none of that. He begged, swearing he'd never killed anyone. He wasn't defiant or cold, just terrified. Still, I trusted my gut. I believed I was stopping a murderer before he struck again. And so, I ended him. I told myself it was justice, a necessary act. I believed I'd save someone from becoming Ethan's next victim. But the truth doesn't care what you believe. When I dug deeper after the fact, the reality became clear. There was no evidence, no proof of guilt, no pattern of violence, just my paranoia convincing me that instinct alone was enough. And because of that, I killed a man who may have been completely innocent. Lumen had endured horrors most people couldn't imagine, taken captive, tortured, and broken down by a twisted group of men who thrived on cruelty. When she escaped, her pain didn't just linger, it consumed her. She was desperate to make them pay, and I understood that feeling all too well. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Lumen saw me, really saw me. She knew what I was, and she didn't run. Instead, she embraced my darkness, becoming part of my world. Together, we hunted her tormentors, one by one. Then she found him, a man she swore was there the night she was taken. She believed he was part of the group, one of the monsters who had tortured her, and I believed her. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. If Lumen said he was involved, that was enough. But the truth isn't always simple. After it was too late, I discovered that the man hadn't played the role I assumed. He'd been there, yes, but he wasn't one of them. He hadn't hurt Lumen. He hadn't tortured or abused her. He was just a bystander, someone who had witnessed the horror but never participated. In my rush to protect Lumen, I ignored what I always told myself mattered most, the truth. And because of that, I killed a man who didn't deserve to die. El Sapo wasn't innocent, but he wasn't one of my usual targets either. He wasn't a sadistic predator who took pleasure in tormenting others. He was a professional, a hired gun doing bloody work for the right price, a man who lived in the dark corners of the criminal world, following orders and carrying out violent jobs. That's not the kind of person the code taught me to kill. I focus on those who slip through the cracks, the ones who kill repeatedly and escape justice. El Sapo didn't fit that profile, but I killed him anyway. It wasn't methodical. It wasn't planned. There was no plastic-lined room or quiet moment of reflection before the blade struck. This wasn't the careful precision I prided myself on. It was reckless, messy, emotional. I wasn't thinking like the predator I'd trained myself to be. I was acting out of anger. It started with Hannah McKay, a woman I should have kept at arm's length, but didn't. She was a killer, like me. Yet I let my feelings cloud my judgment. When I discovered that El Sapo had been sent to kill her, something snapped. I didn't weigh the facts. I didn't plan. I just reacted. I attacked him, raw and uncontrolled. Not a clean kill, but a chaotic mess of violence driven by rage, not reason. It wasn't justice. It wasn't discipline. It was a mistake, one that reminded me just how dangerous my emotions could be. Oliver Saxon was a threat, no doubt about that. He was a sadistic killer, dangerous and cold. But when I killed him, it wasn't about justice. It wasn't about stopping a monster. By the time I got to Saxon, he was already in custody, locked up, surrounded by police. The system had him. He wasn't going anywhere. But that wasn't enough for me. I made a choice, a selfish one. I walked into that interrogation room and slit Saxon's throat. I told everyone it was self-defense, a desperate attempt to protect myself. But that was a lie. The truth was simpler and uglier. I killed Saxon because I wanted to, because it felt good, because I was angry, broken, and tired of pretending to be something I wasn't. This wasn't justice. This wasn't the code. This was something else, something worse. For the first time, I crossed the line completely. I didn't kill to stop a murderer or to protect the innocent. I killed because it satisfied something inside me, something dark, something I couldn't control. Saxon's death wasn't about discipline or purpose. It was about rage. And that's when I knew I wasn't the controlled vigilante I once believed myself to be. In that moment, I wasn't following the code. I was just another killer. I always told myself I followed the code of Harry, that my kills were calculated, purposeful, righteous. But these 10 lives tell a different story. They weren't killers. They weren't threats. They were accidents, misjudgments, mistakes. At first I believed I was in control, that I only killed those who deserved it. But the truth is far messier. Over time I stopped relying on facts and evidence. I let instinct take over. I killed out of anger, out of fear, and sometimes just because it felt easier than facing the truth. These 10 innocent lives are proof that the code was never enough to contain what I really am. A killer, one who thought he could control his urges, but instead let them control him. What do you think? Did I deserve to get away with it? Or was I always destined to fail? Let me know.